Take your sunblock.
Yeah.
And yes, it is cold.
Yeah.
Today I really noticed it. Yeah. Good evening. It is 5:01, and I'm calling the special meeting to order. I want to welcome everybody. This is a special meeting of the Kent School District Board, which is held in public to comply with the Open Public Meeting Act. The purpose of this meeting is a work session to discuss the Superintendent 2023 Annual Plan Evaluation with Dr. Larry Nyland, as well as a policy work session with Ms. Pam Howley. Our few housekeeping items. Dr. Jewel Harmon, our Chief Accountability Officer, and Ms. Naomi Zentella, our School Board Executive Assistant, will be attending the meeting via Zoom, and also Director Margell. I'm adding that. At this time, I'm going to call the roll, and first off is Vice President Benno.
Present.
Director Farah.
Present.
Director Margell.
Present.
Director Clark.
Present.
And obviously, I'm here. We are on to 2.01, Superintendent 2023 Annual Plan Evaluation with Dr. Larry Nyland. I'd like to call on Superintendent Vello for introductions.
Thank you, President. I'm excited to be back with you today. Today we have Dr. Nyland rejoining us along with Ms. Simone Hamilton, our Director of Equity and Strategic Engagement. And it's a follow-up to where we left off last. And I wanted to again thank the board for approving our collaborative work together last week on the goals, the evaluation form, and some of the criteria we'll be using. And tonight will just be a continuation as we lead into our December 2nd retreat. So I'm excited to get started. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Nyland.
All right. Technology is amazing.
When it works.
Well, President Hamada and members of the board, Superintendent Vella, thank you for your continued work on this progress. So tonight we wanted to just cover briefly what many of you have been waiting for, and it's probably still not exactly what you've been waiting for, but we're getting there. Good progress. I have to remain centered here. All right. Front and center. I can't wander. All right. Awesome work. You've got a research-based superintendent evaluation rating and your 4 district goals for the district. I've been trying to find current information. My information from the time that I was in Seattle was something like only 1/3 of the boards across America have goals. Whether they're measurable or not, that's a different issue. But they only 1/3 have goals, and then if you go to the measurable part, even fewer have measurable goals. So you're on the right track. Good job. Tonight we want to dig a little bit deeper into those key performance indicators and a case study with Simone and Hamilton. So the timeline is that we've got a little bit of time tonight to kind of center in, check with you, and make sure that we're headed in the right direction. One of the board homework items that we'll ask you to start thinking about is maybe we needed 5 goals. We've got 4 goals, and we've got 5 board members. Just kind of start thinking about which one of those goals is one that you care most about, and that you can kind of be the champion. And so part of what you said last time a couple of times ago was, wow, there is a lot here. And so keeping up with all of it, you're certainly welcome to do that, but if one or two of you are focused in on each of the goals, that can help all of us. December 2nd is the rescheduled retreat, and at that point in time, we'll have more of the quantifiable and baseline information that you've been asking for. And then on January 18th is kind of that quarterly review and the next stage in the annual quarterly review of the superintendent goals. You're going to see this one a lot tonight. Spencer gave us great direction and focus here in terms of, you've given us a lot of green progress indicators. We're not putting those in front of you tonight. And the goal has been, should you have a different word, the next piece has been the orange, which is performance indicators, which I think of as kind of a North Star. Where are we going and what aligns all of those arrows? So Executive Cabinet has spent a lot of time on this, and they've been working really on how to get those arrows aligned. So they've talked about how they align their work, and especially Goal 1. You have several people who are contributing to Goal 1, so it isn't just one person that's responsible for that. Many of these goals have an aspect of them in that it doesn't happen here at the district level. It's something that has to happen at the school level throughout the district. I think you've seen before the DARTS work, which has literally dozens of data sources and measures that are kept for the district. And so Executive Cabinet has been reviewing those to say which ones of those work. And then thinking about the real bottom line for us is what's student impact, what are the board priorities, and how do we identify what matters most. So this is where Executive Cabinet landed. So Goal 1, there was a lot of discussion about the individual progress indicators, and trying to pick one or two of those was really problematic. And well, you picked kind of my area of work, but what happened to my area of work? My area of work didn't get picked. So the one that touches everybody is graduation rate, and that's part of the tagline that on your website, ready to excel in college careers and in life. So that's one that everybody can contribute to. Goal 2, the focus was a sense of belonging and inclusion for the community, for the staff, and for students. And that's the one that Simone Hamilton will dive into a little bit here in just a moment. Goal 3, Executive Cabinet was really creative on this one. So I think the two indicators are the bond and boundaries. And what those two share is, between those two, are we able to come up with buildings that have optimal capacity? So some buildings aren't overloaded and some buildings underloaded. So very creative measure in terms of, that can measure a lot of what we do under this goal. And then Goal 4 was also a challenge in terms of, there was a lot of good discussion about, is it hiring or is it retaining? And the wisdom was, we've done fairly well at the hiring, and we've actually even hired for a fair amount of diversity, but we don't retain that diversity. So the one that seems to be the key indicator, the one that might drive all of our work, is what can we do to retain staff, which would get at some of the things you've talked about, quality of the culture, and attracting staff that want to stay here. So those are kind of the North Star beacons that we're laying before you. And if those are the North Star beacons, then for December 2nd, Executive Cabinet will come back with specific measures and baseline data. So with that, we'll come back and talk about this in a minute. With that, I'll introduce Simone Hamilton, and she's going to do a deeper dive in student voice and agency.
Thank you, Larry. Good evening, members of the board, Superintendent Villa, Team KSD. So glad to have you all here. So we're going to spend a lot of time on this graphic today, and my hope is that the way we're going to use it, you're going to be able to map it over a lot of the goals and a lot of the work that you'll see throughout the year. So just bear with me as we move through this. Also, I'm just going to call out before we begin, you'll notice as I move through here at the top left corner, I've made that graphic small because we're going to examine each part of it. So as we go through it, you'll still have that anchor image of where we're at in the graphic, even though we're zooming in on a certain part. So starting at the top, you have your strategic goals and you have your superintendent goals. But if we look at just goal 2, that top is engaging parents, students, and staff in community and two-way communication. With Superintendent Vella's goals is really focusing on student and family engagement and really the engagement aspect of that work. If we continue down that graphic, the key performance indicator for this goal is a sense of belonging and inclusion at KSD. But the question becomes, how do we measure that? We need to know where we're coming from, AKA our baseline. For this context, it's the previous school strategic plan, the blueprint. And in that plan, they have 23 indicators for measuring goal 2. That's a lot. And with that many indicators, we're limited in our ability to actually measure the impact of the goal. So to avoid the dilution of actually understanding that impact, we need to narrow that down to a key performance indicator to ensure that we're on the right track. So as you can see, we landed on sense of belonging. For example, one of those indicators was students feeling safe at school, with only one source of measuring that, when in actuality, we need an indicator that's more broad. We need an indicator that allows us to examine safety, but examines it not just even in physical safety on the space, mental safety, social emotional safety, all of these things. And when you have an indicator that's so narrow, you're not able to capture the work in a broad setting. Since I've also taken on this role, I continually ask my team and others, how do we measure what we value? And really what we value is students feeling like they belong, and that they're included in school, which will naturally lead to them feeling safer and a higher sense of belonging and inclusion. Furthermore, we've often only used surveys and quantitative data, and in the absence of that qualitative data, it doesn't provide us an understanding of the drivers and the aspects of student belonging and inclusion and how we get, I don't even want to say get better at that, but make that more of a reality and a baseline for what kids are experiencing. We also know that we can do better, and that's what we're going to do. But we have to start here as our baseline, and we have to start somewhere before we can go forward. So thinking about this other part of maybe, Director Margell, I'm just going to move you down on the screen a little bit so you can see. Okay. So now we're operating in the green section over here, the progress indicators. And that's kind of what you've seen on those plans a lot. And this is really what work we're going to do. That's going to drive our plans. So student agency and leadership, we believe, will have the greatest impact in connection to the overarching goal that's complementing the key performance indicator. So why did we pick this strategy? There are many things that can move us, but the why behind picking this strategy is rooted in this, that when student agency exists, students can experience a learning environment where power is distributed, knowledge is democratized, diverse perspectives are welcomed, and students are intellectually and emotionally nourished. And we believe that if we execute this plan on time in the way we've outlined, we will be able to create opportunities for students to be teachers and experts, and to have a say in decision-making processes, and to take ownership over their learning. Now, I'm gonna preface by we don't know if this will work, but we think it will. And here's the evidence as to why we're engaging in this effort. Using an agency framework allows us to develop students' agency and leadership, which we believe is a key ingredient to them being successful in all aspects of their life. It also provides us with a landscape to measure agency, which is a major factor in students believing they can make a difference by leveraging their expertise in their environments where they can experience love that fosters a profound sense of self and their value in this world. Furthermore, there are consequences where there is an absence of student agency, because the current pedagogy, the current environment they're in, can actually cause permanent damage to them. academic rigor cannot exist without love. If students aren't valued in their environment, they'll perceive academic rigor as high expectations and punishment. Challenging students in the absence of loving them is also an application of force that only results in resistance. And we see that either in their academic data, their discipline data, and just what they're reporting overall, that energy that you can feel in a building. Without student agency, love, and the pedagogy of voice, there's no growth and no movement, which means the net force is zero. And when students aren't provided an opportunity to operate from a place of fullness or truth about all that they are, they will always feel less than when in a space that wasn't designed for them. But conversely, when students develop a sense of agency, they will own and love all of who they are. And it won't matter if the space was designed for them, because they will operate within knowing that all they bring to the table makes it better. They will no longer exist to try and fit in spaces, they exist to transform them. And it's really important for me and my team to understand this why. Like why we do this, not just because we know it's a good thing to do, not just because it's what everybody tells us to do, but like what is the research and the evidence shows from the impact that if done right, can create these types of environments for young people. So naturally, you're probably wondering like, when will all of this happen? And when do the benchmarks and when can we expect this and that? So at a high level, I want to share with you what's happened since September and all the way to where we are today. My team and I have also looked at this kind of with two components in mind. The first is our student advisory and design teams, and everybody up here is familiar with them, and Director Margell, I can't wait till you get to share space with the students and they get to come and share all that with you. So I have really good news, is we're continuing them and also expanding them to further down grade levels and schools. So here are some of the major benchmarks that we've already met that we're on track. So last year was limited to high school, so we've been doing a lot of work at the beginning of the year to think about what does the structure look like for middle schools and elementary schools. It can't look the same as high school. There's different needs, different types of staff supports, so on and so forth. Then the last month, we've been re-engaging with those principals, with those student teams, following up with those students at all 4 of our comprehensive high schools. So I'm excited to say that those will start actively meeting in December, those teams again, with a focus on mental health and social-emotional health. So I'm excited to also share with you guys later what they start to work on. We're also going to work on co-constructing teams at iGrad, Kent Lab, and TOP. Given that they're not comprehensive high schools, they have unique idiosyncrasies that require different types of support, and if we really want to take an equitable approach to this, we need to identify what each different group's unique needs are and make sure they're met so that they can succeed. The next one is identifying school building and district level impact projects. So after the design teams, it was clear that they had a ton of ideas. And that's really exciting, but also can be really daunting and intimidating with students where it's like, where do we start? And they're all over the place. So our hope this year is that we're gonna try and facilitate and guide students to identifying a school building impact project related to an area that they wanna focus on. And then we're also going to be developing a district level student group that'll identify a district level impact project. That's the way we're actually gonna actualize student voice. That's how we're gonna actually bring what they want and their opinions into reality, is really resourcing, underwriting, funding, and making sure that everything they need is available for them to see this happen. It's their ideas, and we could take them and do whatever we want with, but I'm in the camp of like, let's get out of their way and give them whatever they need to drive. We have some end of the year targets that the team has set for what we hope all these activities will lead to. We hope that we'll have these active teams at 80% of our schools. Obviously we want 100%, but to be realistic, 80% is already pushing the needle in a big way. There's a lot of schools in Kent. We also want to make sure that each building that has a team has completed some sort of impact project at their building, and then also again, one as a district. I caution and say that maybe we come end year and we're not quite where we want to be, and that's also okay for students to see that sometimes work is multi-year. Sometimes work morphs and changes and evolves as they get more information along the way. But the second part is related to something I mentioned earlier, which was how do we do something different? If we have all these 23 indicators, we don't feel that those measurements are actually inclusive or representative of understanding where we're at in regards to a sense of belonging for our students and other stakeholders, we have to redesign it. But the why? Well, I want to have you guys think about it kind of like in your roles as a board member, which is what is the tool that allows you to know that you've captured the public's feedback? And often it's like, do you measure through your email approval? Do you measure it by the most vocal community members? Do you measure it by the activities in a private Facebook group? Do you how do you go about that? And all of which are valid. I'm not saying none of those are valid, but access is a big part of an equitable culture. And when you have these methods that are limited to those types of ways, you overlook people at the margins, people who are hidden, people who don't have the privilege to access those channels. And that same thing can happen in a school with students or within a district, which is just a microcosm of what larger society is. So when it comes to a sense of belonging and inclusion for students, we are committing to going beyond the capturing of feedback, but to actually engage and actualize different perspectives, ideas, and experiences by having authentic engagement and space for students that's actually more proactive than reactive. And I think those go hand in hand. We can make observations and follow up on those, but truly, the more we can get in front of things and hold the space for the students to be designing their way forward that they want to forge, the less we're going to have to react to these ruptures or these crises that build up to the point of like, nobody was listening to me, nobody heard me, and this is what I wanted done. So then what you'll see is on this bottom track. This is a 10-foot view of how we're going to go about reimagining our approach and the type of engagement with students. So we have, I forgot to grab it, but I have this book called Street Data, where that framework came in from. And they talk about going beyond satellite data, which is test scores, what we usually do, assessment, metrics around behavior type stuff, you name it. But this is about getting the data at the street level, the side-by-side and immersed with students. And that involves certain types of surveys, but also includes empathy interviews. It includes listening sessions. It includes town halls. It includes equity walks. It includes following a student for the day. Those are the types of methods and measuring that we believe will actually truly measure a sense of belonging. And so what we've done so far is we did that student equity and inclusion survey last year, which was the second year that it was done. But we learned a lot from it when we did a kind of a quasi-after-action review. We realized there were some technology barriers to getting full engagement, especially from our 6th to 8th graders. We recognized that it was too long, way too long. There was questions all over the place, from curriculum to identity to teachers to environment, and that's a lot to ask a student to navigate even within a survey. And so what we spent doing was revising it. And also on top of that, if you disaggregated by grade and school and looked at the response rate, it wasn't where I personally want it to be. I think when there's a single-digit percentage of the population that responds to something, for me it makes me really uncomfortable to make decisions based off that feedback because it's not a representative sample. But sometimes we're put in positions where there isn't that engagement. And so my team's committed to how do we actually make sure that we're as close to a triple-digit percentage in response rate from students. So we did a lot of re-looking at it. Also working with the research team on how do we develop a student belonging and inclusion index. So like, what is that collection of measures? What is kind of, even if there's like a net score or something? This is an area that we're kind of forging new territory in. A lot of school districts use tools like Panorama and other things to measure sense of belonging, but still there's something missing because it's still quantitative in a way. There's still a qualitative aspect of this. People are like, I don't know how to describe this feeling. It's just a feeling. That's what we're trying to better understand what students are experiencing. So what we did on Monday, there will be the high school student survey that goes out. It's 8 questions, and 3 of which are actually open-ended, asking about what are their current challenges and frustration. If they had a magic wand, what would they do with it? What are areas that they think in the short term could be addressed immediately? And then the other questions are tailored around their environment. How are you experiencing your environment? Not just what's happening in your classroom with your curriculum, but what is the conditions in the space we're asking you to be your best self in? And where is there a discrepancy between where we want people to be and what people are actually experiencing? And the last thing that'll happen after we get that survey is, analyzing it, coding it, being able to share the data. And what's really great is we're going to be able to share that data with also the student design teams, specifically to their building. So they're also going to be able to operate and adapt their projects based off of in real time what their students are experiencing. The other thing that was the problem with last year's survey, it was done once. It was done in November, and by the time we would get the data all organized, because it was so long and so many people, it'd be February. And by that time, when we talk to students, things have changed. Yep. Their experiences change in this. So what we're doing now are more cycles, smaller cycles of inquiry with students that are really targeted and really focused. which will then lead to some follow-up listening sessions. And that's what came out of the last thing, was those student design teams, those students saying, this is what I want, this is what I need, how can we make it happen? And so we're excited to be able to do that as well. Another key component of this is taking advantage of civic engagement opportunities for students and regional leadership. So one example was last Friday? I think it was last Friday. I'm losing. The month of October just went like whoosh. So last Friday, we had some students join Representative Orwell down at the City of Kent Council talking about a new thing that they passed in regards to a youth crisis center that they want to set up. We had 2 students that were on those design team comes and share, and when I tell you they rocked that place, they rocked that place. They came in guns blazing to let everybody know how they felt, what they wanted, what they thought. And it was so cool as Team KSD to be there and to support them and to like champion them on with that. It was even cool to have one of the students' parents there with them also there as support and engaging in that. So that's one way we're going to continue to do that and try and also put together some listening sessions during the month of December. Sorry, I'm really jumping all over with months. November and December to do more listening sessions around the way in which the county and the state is wanting to develop supports for mental health and social emotional learning. So stay tuned. We're going to have Representative Orwell being able to come in and listen to that, hopefully Representative Smith, and to really come and listen. So before they go back into session, they have genuine feedback and ideas and needs from students. And I can tell you that meeting that was last Friday, the students were able to push back on a lot of things that adults in the room had thought what was the right thing to do or the way to go about it, even to the point challenging, you need to change this law, because this law is a barrier to meeting the needs that we know students need. So again, super duper proud of them. And then we also have this regional leadership opportunity that's being sponsored by PSD, P-E-S-C, I don't know how to say that acronym, it's a long one, but you know who I'm talking about. So they've put together through a grant fund with the Gates Foundation and others, this Youth Wisdom Council that's really geared towards elevating youth voices of color. And so we're going to be doing some work with them. We have I think 4 kids from KSD on that council. They get paid. They plan monthly convenings. And it's invited for the district level leadership teams to join those students in experiencing the convenings that they designed. And then have a home-based group for those students to come back at that district level and work on the project. So those are some peripheral things that anytime those come available, we're going to take advantage of them, and we're going to make sure that we show up and that we engage. So kind of wrapping it all up, ultimately, like I said before, we may not get it right. In fact, I actually don't expect us to get it right the whole time. But what we've done is we've set up our work for continuous improvement with some tight and loose expectations and activities that will provide us really valuable information along the way. And I really believe that the key ingredient for success in all of this is going to be dependent on maximizing the amount of student leadership that we leverage in this process and in this plan. So kind of just tying it all back together to this diagram with goal 2, this is what that diagram would look like filled out with goal 2. So with that, thank you. And do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
How are you going to, how do the kids become a part of these leadership groups? Are they selected? So we get a variety of kids. Do they come forward or?
Yeah, so last year we kind of gave the ask to principals to identify students who aren't traditionally on leadership groups, not in clubs, not in ASB, these students that they have relationships with, that they interact with, but often see them not necessarily in collective action type spaces. And so that brought together a very diverse group of students. That brought together students that didn't even know they went to the same school together and had never seen each other. It brought from seniors to freshmen, all across the board, which then led to why those listening sessions were so powerful, because all ideas were allowed in that space. All different types of identities were respected and honored in those spaces. For this year, not only have principals identified a couple other students that heard about and were like, hey, I want to know, also the students are driving their own recruitment of hey, my friend wants to do this, I know so-and-so is working on this, and so they're kind of naturally and organically building their own coalition at a grassroots level. And really what we're doing as central office staff in partnership with the admin is just making sure the space is set up for what that unique group of students needs to do their meetings.
And obviously this is going to take, with anything that you get involved in time. And I'm curious, is this done beyond the school day, within the school day?
That's a great question. So we've actually been doing it during the school day, and we rotate which period it happens. A lot of our students are either engaged in extracurriculars, or sometimes I hate just being like, you've just been at school all day, can I keep you for another couple hours? So we've been flexible with how that meeting is. Sometimes it's during the day. We've also had sometimes where we meet them before school, or it's right after school. But again, it gets back to like, instead of prescribing them the schedule and the structure that works for us, we're figuring out, letting them to decide what that structure is, and then what do we need to do to make that possible.
And one last follow-up, obviously, I mean, it's a lot. I can see it, but good luck. And I love working with kids, and I love, them having a voice and participating. I'm curious about the budget, when you said that they've got to do things in their schools and with the district. Do we have some kind of alignment with our budget where the funds are going to come to perform this?
I don't hold the purse strings in KSD.
I mean,
so
is that,
I'm
looking.
Well, what I can say,
I hope so. I think
what
so.
I will say to that, President Mater, really is, this is a whole part of that.
Yeah.
When we are collaboratively working as a board superintendent's governance team, and we're targeting where we believe the most impact's going to make on students and student success, we then align our resources with that. And so I can share with you that we will be aligning either those resources we're currently using and realigning them to the goals that we've now focused on, or looking at how we might be able to use dollars that are there. There are a whole host of areas that are really around making sure that we support kids in schools. So
That's an answer of yes.
you bet.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of outside organizations too that really want to invest in
Yes.
this type of work.
Yeah, I'm sure,
For us,
I
yeah.
can see that in my community work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was going to ask, that was, you answered the question I was going to ask, because I know like the Kent Educators of Color do listening sessions and whatnot, so I was wondering if you were going to bring in other agencies, so that's great. But I do want to say I really love the student agency and leadership plan. It makes me think of one of my cooperating teachers back in the day that was just like, Joe, you can't teach who you don't know. And that's always kind of stuck with me, just like I don't want to be just this blob in the front of the room, like in front of my students. And so it's this idea of like students need to feel like they belong, and what are we doing to make sure that students feel like they have a sense of belonging? And I love the sense like even if they don't feel like they belong, they have the agency, they're going to create a space for themselves. And I think that's really powerful in this plan. So I thank you for that. And I also love that we're moving away from these 23 points. I feel like if we're already collecting it, it's not really indicative of the work that we're doing. And so by coming up with a new plan, we can really see what we're going to actually do and affect change in. And so I really appreciate that, instead of saying, well, I think this point of data matches, like, no, because that feels like that's very correlational. So this feels like a really true cause and effect. I did have a couple questions. Specifically, I noticed that Kent Virtual Academy wasn't on there, but iGrad was. Are they going to be part of this plan in some way, or students who are in that virtual academy going to be included?
Yeah, so definitely iGrad is on there, and that's a good note, and why we work as a team.
Okay.
Because yes, Virtual Academy.
Awesome. And then my last question was looking at, you said 80%, and in my teacher evaluation, we have like, if you're distinguished, you get this, if you're proficient, you get this. So I'm wondering if 80%, is that distinguished, is that proficient, is that, where on the rubric is that? Because I would just be curious, because I think 80% is very proficient, and I would think that higher would be even distinguished. So I don't know if anyone has the answer to that question, but I would put that out there as, if we're going to be looking at a rubric,
Yeah.
that not necessarily a percentage, but maybe we categorize what percentages would go in.
Yeah, great, really, listening sessions are the most important part, because like you said, we learn so much from the kids. Then, and I just wanted to follow up with President Hamada said. We will align our resources of what we care, right? It's not about the money. We always spend most of what we believe in, our values. So, if this is what we value, then we will find the money. So that's the other thing. I wanted to ask you a quick question, and maybe I misunderstood. something along the line of how do we measure student sense of belonging, and it's by test scores. What does that mean?
Oh, we don't measure it by test scores, but a lot of the metrics that we use in general as it relates to students is quantitative.
Right.
So it's kind of like the outcome of the behavior
Right.
versus, I think, measuring kind of what's happening to contribute to the behavior. So yes, to your exact point, of those 23 indicators,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things in there that have zero connection to
Absolutely.
a sense of belonging. They're almost like they read compliance-like or procedural-like
Right.
than the actual intrinsic nature of what I think that goal is supposed to do. So you're spot on. You can't measure sense of belonging with
Right.
assessment data. Do we believe that maybe that
Right.
we will see a different academic outcomes, a decrease in discipline or certain bullying or calling out or you name it? Yeah, we might. And that's where we start to triangulate information to be able to really identify the core of that strategy or that thing that we're doing to know that's what we need to continue. But we also triangulate to also understand, like, is there one little thing that's actually interrupting this whole thing that if we just remove that, we can continue on versus just trashing the whole thing and then not realizing it's just a minute thing. So yeah, test scores can't measure sense of belonging, and that's why we have to get away from just quantitative ways. And also too, I think sometimes even those quantitative surveys,
Right.
you have to be so careful about how you write the question, that you're not even prescribing them a negative or deficit-based thought. And really, how do you ask it in a way that invites like
Absolutely.
unadulterated thinking for them?
Absolutely. And one of the things I really want to emphasize is that some of the students don't feel sometimes that taking the survey matters.
Yeah,
Yeah,
So
yep,
that's very true.
to realize, to let them have that ability to understand that what they say matters
yep.
is going to take time to, because this is new, really. So I am very appreciative of, this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
And 80% is just the number. We can increase that
Yep.
however we want, and we just want to make sure we continuously work on making sure that student
Yeah.
agency matters.
Yep.
Director Clark, and then we don't want to
I,
get
uh,
back into.
I, first of all, want to say thank you for bringing focus to what is clearly a challenge that we're under. And I guess the biggest struggle as an old high school teacher is development of leadership. And a sense of belonging is the beginning point.
Yeah.
So I just hope that we're doing a good job of communicating the efforts that different students are undertaking and putting it before their peers so they're recognized for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think to the point about the engagement and survey, sorry, Director Margello, was that there was some ideas thrown around with students and even on the Equity Council around how do we incentivize surveys? Like, how do we play on like the baseline of human behavior of like an incentive? There is a reward for engagement and an incentive in a way that isn't skewing your engagement or what we want, but truly like, I mean, we all the time, if somebody on Amazon's gonna give me $10 to do a review, I might do a review. It's not gonna be, I may give a good review maybe, but I got it. So we're trying to find ways that we can maybe incentivize either the individual student or the collective of student in their school buildings to really engage. And I think the first step of that is being responsive to their feedback. And I think last year was the first time we were able to directly respond and not only respond to it, but let them go forth with it. So, yeah.
And this is just an aside, but I worked with a very old dear friend who was a technology leader by the name of Rick Feitz. And he got assigned the task of taking kids at that time at the junior high into dealing with their falling behind in their reading scores. And Rick was just one of those different type of people. And what he did was he gave them all laptops and told them, you're going to create a school newspaper. Because the one thing that is crystal clear is newspapers, to survive in a community, have to be about the community.
Yep.
And I'm just saying, once again, in your attempts to try and develop an ongoing dialogue, that putting it back in front of the student body is going to have value.
Yeah. Very, very good point.
Director Margell.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited about seeing where all this is going, and I particularly wanted to pull out a word that is not used maybe a lot, which is love. And it just made me so happy to see that in the student agency and leadership plan. And I think it was just really well said that academic rigor cannot exist without love. And that by far was my favorite part of this, because I think we need to love on our students.
Yep.
You know, what we're doing, all of this, I mean, this is an act of love in the time that we take for this. And I think being part of education, you know, is, I don't know, we don't use the word love enough, and I really like seeing that. So I guess applauding that. And I think it's a bold movement, and I think this plan is aspirational and bold, but I like where it's going. I just want to, there was one thing, clarification, and just want to make sure, and I cannot tell you enough how much I love that we are looking at voices outside of the traditional voices, but I hope that that's not discouraging some of those traditional voices to maybe get in there, that the kids that are in ASB and you know, highly involved, that we still want those voices too. I'm sorry, I think I just missed exactly what you said for the selection of students on that.
Yeah, so the selection is both, initially, it was selection around students who kind of, I wouldn't say at the margins, but were naturally doing other things in the school building that necessarily wasn't organized in some sort of collective fashion. So they demonstrated leadership skills, whether it was in class, whether they were that student that always got taken out of class because they had a lot of ideas that maybe wasn't in alignment with the class lesson. But I really encourage and challenge principals to actually look at the behavior, not just like the student, not just what the student looks like, but go deeper when we think about equity, inclusion, diversity, and really look at what other students and all students are bringing to the table. If you just place a student in a group because they are a certain race or speak a certain language, then we're reducing them down to one aspect of their identity. Versus when these groups, that did include some of those, I think, leadership students or some of those captains even of, I know at KM, there was a captain of the track team that participated in that. But what that group of students is doing is, as they're building the spaces that they want to engage with other students, whether that's the ones that are predominantly a conversation or not, they're taking all that into consideration. So even when their listening session happened, they designed it in a way that was accessible, safe, and inclusive, whether you were a student, a multilingual student, or whether you were a student who was president of ASB. But often what happens is sometimes when the spaces are created by the students who are in leadership or in ASB or some of these other more prominent leadership roles, sometimes the other students don't feel that their voice matters in there, or they don't feel that's a space that if they have an idea and it's not fully fleshed out with a plan or how to do it, that it's not welcomed in here. Whereas the last year, these students did such a beautiful job of creating a space where there was more guidelines and parameters to operate within, but nothing was prescribed. Nothing was prescribed. So if you wanted to come in and purely talk about how the short lunchtime is impacting my mental health, or because I'm not able to work on Minecraft and show my work this way, all the way to people having really serious conversations about addiction. And what does that mean? How that's impacting having to even go home to use the bathroom. So it was a spectrum of conversation, which was really powerful and a testament to the leadership and the inclusive thinking that those students did. So I guess the answer to your question is yes, and the way that they've taken this approach is that everybody feels welcome to the table. So definitely those voices are still included, and leveraging some of these other mechanisms through empathy interviews, through other types of listening sessions and surveys even, we can actually target different groups of students to also get down to the minor details about what those needs, interest, ideas look like in those little, I don't want to use like cliques, because I think those have like a negative connotation sometimes in school, but the small communities of students, the kids that always hang out and do all the same things.
Right.
So, yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And I think anytime that you have a yes and answer tends to be better than most. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. Thank you.
Totally. Is that
And
good?
I just have one final comment is, when you walk in a room, just like when I first met you, there's just energy and love flowing from you, and that helps any program.
Thank you, President Amata.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton.
Thank you. Thank you, members of the board.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Call back Dr. Nyland to close us off.
Great example of kind of the 4 years, 4 goals, continuous improvement, continue to get the data, continue to fold it back in, continue to get better and better. So, we're checking with you tonight to say, are these the kind of North Star that you want executive cabinet to aim at and bring back on December 2nd? Those benchmarks and baseline that you've been asking for.
Interesting.
It pretty much covers the gamut for me on every one of them. Again, even listening to Ms. Hamilton, it's a lot. We have a lot out there. So I just hope we have the energy to fulfill all this. We can sure shoot for it, but, you know, we don't want to be too critical of what we're trying to go after either.
I'm still struggling with goal 4 because I thought it was broader than that. It isn't just about retention, but it is about not just how people feel about their work and workload and challenges for support and that sort of thing. But I think in light of the aging of our workforce, it has to be about dealing with and making it attractive and recruiting as a part of that. Is that unfair?
Yeah, absolutely. No, Director Clark, I would say that's another yes and. What my team tried to do is really capture all of that. So if we capture the retention rates, and those rates are at a place where we are keeping, specifically our younger teachers longer, that was a more of an indicator. That's why we landed it. But definitely recruitment, onboarding, and all those pieces you saw earlier are a part. This would be like landing on that one that we could be reporting on as we come back to the board. And this is why the retention rates are at where they are. Or maybe it's a baseline that gives us that it's not where we want it. Now we know what to really double down our efforts in recruitment, onboarding, et cetera.
May I jump in with a question too?
Of course.
On goal number 3, sorry, I think a lot about goals and I try to see how you can break them, right? And you end up getting unintended consequences for you're meeting a goal, but you're not, you know, you're winning the battle, but not the war, right? And so I think about goal 3, there's certain programs, you know, we've just lately been talking a lot about the Odyssey program, right? And that we'd like to have more kids in the Odyssey program and be able to identify them. And what I would hate to see is that we get more kids into the Odyssey program and that increases percentage of kids at a particular school that would end up hurting in the evaluation for balancing out school capacities. And so I just want to, if you could maybe talk to me a little bit about the school capacities and optimum program, just kind of talk about that a little bit and see if that works out well still.
Sure. Yeah, again, as I mentioned in goal 4, as my team tried to take all of the, I would say, areas we would be working on it and would have impacts in other areas, we landed on balancing our school capacity. As you know, there are only two areas, if you look at that particular goal on the form. There's only two areas, and we landed on these two. What you're sharing there in terms of program, the capacity pieces, by increasing those, it's going to provide us more of an opportunity to either grow program or put programs where those programs are needed. So I would say that part of what you're saying, Director Margell, really, I think it's a yes and also belongs in goal 1 in terms of quality of program and how are you measuring the impact of that program itself. And so I'd say it's in both of those. That's why I would let all boards know that even though these goals are under goal 1, 2, 3, 4, they're interconnected.
Yeah.
And I just shared a example of how they're interconnected, and I'd like to give time to Mr. Damon Hunter. If he'd have anything to share, more to share to that, please do. But that was a first take, Director Margell. So if you have, does that help, or I could have?
Oh, yes, no, I'm sorry, that was great.
Great.
I appreciate the answers to the question.
Super.
And it's somewhat, if I may, it feels like we're still continuing, that this is a living document.
Yes.
And
Thank
it
you,
continues to grow with us
Absolutely.
as these goals and achievements and just the district grows and
Yes,
changes.
absolutely. As I shared earlier, this is why I really like this process. It's research-based, it's involving, and I think, I believe it was Ms. Hamilton that shared, we want to get to that point where there's a goal area that one or two of you champion that help support, because I think that's going to really get us to where we want to go and really making sure that we're making progress and actually are assessing ourselves in the spirit of continuous improvement.
I have feedback. For me, I really enjoyed Ms. Hamilton's presentation, and so my expectation now is that when we see these goals are going to be just as good as that and organized, because I actually want to see how all those things are, because that made sense to me. Some of these other things have been more nebulous, but now seeing that in action, I'm like, okay, so for every one of these, I want to see something very similar, so I know what exactly we're going to do and how we're going to get there. So I don't know if that's a high bar or if I just made more work for everybody, but for me, I really enjoyed seeing that because it made sense, and attaching it to all the different parts of the chart really for visually, it made me really see that. So I want to see more of that.
That's really good feedback, Vice President Beno, and that's one reason we wanted to show, quote, an exemplar, but really more about making sure that we're all on that same page, that we understand that there's a difference between assessment data that you keep with a percentage and a plan that you would be implementing. We just talked about goal 3, where a lot of things are already happening.
Yeah.
And we're going to measure them in a way that's similar, a little different because of different content. We want to make sure that the format was right, and it sounds like it, for you, it's
For me,
making
it would,
sense.
and so then I, like the question about goal 3 and goal 4, if I see it written out like that, that might help me visualize that a little bit
Super.
more. So
Good feedback.
I really appreciate that, and thanks again to Ms. Hamilton for a great presentation. So that really clicked a lot of things for me.
I just wanted to follow up with the fact that this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
Right? So this is not written in stone. And we can always revisit these goals and figure out if we find that we're not getting the same data measurements that we are seeing, the improvement on our baseline, then we can always go back and say, we have to try. It's a living document. It's a moving improvement, and there's no such thing as a perfect.
Yeah.
So that's what I would go by, and just.
And just a follow-up question. So as I understand, on our retreat, is that where we're going to see more of these outlined? Is that what I hear you say?
Actually, a good transition to back to.
Yes.
Thank you, President Hamada. Perfect timing, too.
Yes, so Executive Cabinet will be aiming at these, and we'll be coming back with measures and baseline data. So there won't be enough time to go as deep as what Simone was able to do right here, but be plenty for us to continue to dive into, and love the conversation about, no, it's not in stone, and yes, we'll continue to learn. one of the other places that's worked on the student voice piece, the adults figured, oh, students want safety and support. And when they actually talked to the students said they wanted to be happy and they wanted to be proud.
Yeah.
Which, you know, when you
Interesting.
pick a target like that, then it does change the way that you think and the way that you act, and drives us back to, oh, students want to be loved, they want to be happy. So it's an ongoing process, and we continue to refine the goal and we continue to refine the strategies. So for December 2nd, for the board, we're asking that the board would think about those 4 goals and which one of those would be your number 1 and maybe a backup. And then for executive cabinet, they'll be working on bringing back measures that will measure these KPIs and the baseline information for those that we have baseline information for. So,
Clarify, when we say number 1, does that mean the most important ones or the one that we want to hear the number 1 on, to maybe clarify?
thank you. This is really long-term. So this is saying over the next year or 2, which goal would you, as an individual board member, like to put your time and energy into? So you're welcome to do all of them, but it's kind of like which one is a focal point for you that you'd like to have be that area that you dive into and learn a little bit more about. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
And I just want to add, Dr. Nyland, again, thank you for all your work on this, but this is what our community has been asking for. They want to see that. They want to hear those particulars. So we're going in the right direction. I hope everybody is watching our session tonight, and will stay tuned to even more, because it's getting more exciting to me. So thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
Good
Dr.
work.
Nam.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Looks like we're on to 2.02, and I'm going to call on Superintendent Vela for introductions.
Thank you, President Hamada. I'd like to invite Ms. Pam Hawley, our policy coordinator, up to the podium to begin our presentation. Really, it's our continuation of our policy work. As she's making her way up here, she's going to be handing some material out to you. And I wanted just to tee us up that we did a lot of work the last policy session, and we did talk about what we were going to be working on next. So hopefully we can, I know we used an hour, but in this hour we can work toward a couple of different policies, even though if we get to another reading, that's fine. But again, working together on the policy work that we started. Ms. Hawley.
Good evening, President Hamada, members of the board, Superintendent Vela, all of Team KSD, Ms. Antello if you're here. We're going to continue on with our policy 2021. We'll start just with a brief refresher on classifications, which you hear every time, the intersection between procedure and policy. And I've printed everything off on the PowerPoint so that we can focus on making changes to the policies up on the screen. So we'll start with 2021. I'm going to minimize this and pull up the policy that we can work on together. As a refresher, we had first reading last policy work session. This is second reading, so we're continuing on. Also, you should have received an email from me yesterday with Vice President Benno's suggested policy. And I hope you had a chance to take a look at that. Since we're on such short time tonight, hopefully we can get through some things. So give me just 1 second here. Okay, so we'll start with the update as we made some of the changes last time. And you can see the changes with track changes on, but I'm going to turn those off to make it easier to see how this reads. Some of the suggestions from last time were to put in additionally, the Kent School District Board of Directors believe in having certificated full-time teacher librarians in all schools which support students. That was one of the board's suggestions. And another suggestion was about the board considers it to be in the best interest of the students to have Kent School District libraries work with external partners, i.e. King County Library System, in supporting library information and technology programs. That's some of the language that you suggested that we added in last time. So this is what it looks like with those suggestions, but we hadn't come to a conclusion, or the board had not come to a conclusion on what it wanted to see. And I wanted to talk just for a minute again about board philosophy on libraries. Is it to support broad interests or narrow interests? And whatever the board comes to a consensus on, it may challenge what your personal beliefs are. But we have to move past that for the good of the students. Whatever the board's consensus is on how we go forward, and then how procedure will be managed with this policy once it's done. So, any starting points? Would you like to go to Vice President Benno's policy?
Can I make a comment before we
Sure,
do that?
please.
So I feel like last time we were tasked, and I was like, wow, that is a big ask. Because I was like, well, the world is my oyster, so let me do some exploring. And so I looked at several policies around us, and then you sent us some policies that I hadn't looked at. And then I even went as far as looking at what is the Washington School Librarian Association says, and the National School Librarian Association, and was looking, I even talked to librarians and trying to get feedback from people. And so based on that, this document was kind of pieced together, and like, I don't know how people feel about it. I don't think that's perfect. I think that there's some things we can change and edit. I think it's a great baseline, so I hope everyone had a chance to look at it. I don't know how it's going to incorporate with the things that we talked about last time. Some of the things are kind of similar, but I just wanted to make sure that's where everyone knew where that came from, is just me going out and doing my research, because you asked us a very big question, and I really sat and thought about, what do I think libraries in Kent School District should be, and what would my colleagues think, and would my colleagues agree? And so this is the document that came from that. So
Let's
just so y'all
pull
know.
yours up so we can look at it together.
Right.
And I did print it off so it's easier to view, but let's take a look here.
Ms. Holly, when you're doing that, when you get it up, would you enlarge it just a little bit?
Sure.
I know we have a copy of it, but
Yep.
And I don't know if I didn't understand the assignment, but this is what the assignment is, and I tend to be an overachiever, so I appreciate your indulgence with this.
A+.
I appreciate it.
Because it's great that you took the time to do this so that we can, have a starting point again. Maybe that's what we need, is a fresh look at it. Okay, so let's pull this down. Superintendent Vela, is that
yes, that's right.
good enough?
And I was really doing that just for the viewers, not myself.
Okay.
Just kidding.
Sure.
Sure,
Steve?
sure. Well, I read through this, and I was pretty darn impressed with it, actually. I actually liked it a lot better than the policy we had in front of us. However, being tasked with what you said at the last session is, I can't just use my own baseline of how I feel. And trying to get a handle on how overall our students and community feel. I mean, I haven't done surveys or anything like that, so I'm out in the community and I read my email. I know how many emails I got over the book thing. I know how many people I talked to and stuff, but that was just one small example. So I'm not sure if I'm in a position to, I'm going a lot with my values and ideas, so I'm not sure how I can let go of that for the whole community. I'm kind of struggling with that.
The thing is that the board will have to reach a consensus at some point so that we can move this policy forward. And there are a lot of things to consider. If you are thinking broadly and you think that it's okay to have books about the Holocaust, as I mentioned before, in the library for students, you have to be willing to have a book that disputes the Holocaust. If you're going to say that you're broad-minded, and, you know, that's part of the challenge here.
Oh, boy.
When I read that, it really brought something that Spencer pointed out to me when we were first reading that policy, which is if you look at the policy protocol of this policy that we have, that should be the policy and this should be the protocol.
Oh, as far procedure, like a matching
Exactly.
procedure.
Procedure, I'm sorry, when I said protocol, I meant procedure. And because if you look at the procedure, it's broad. And to me, when I hear policy, it's something that encompasses all, right? Something that covers, and that's just the baseline, and then we can go, deeper and kind of define what that policy, how it should be implemented. So that's why I wanted to kind of get us to think that way, because, this is very specific, but then we need to be like taking a step back and making it more broad.
And I think part of that is, do we narrow it down to school libraries are solely for academic use and for furthering education, the curriculum? Or is it for personal interest? So that's narrower than a big, saying everything broadly, but you have to lean one way or the other so that procedure can be written for that.
Right. And I mean, yeah, if you look at that, you can really see what I'm talking about. I don't know if anybody read that procedure, but it's exactly what we want this policy to.
So we're saying backtrack and kind of have the policy match the procedure.
I
If
would
you-
say
you think.
use the language that is in the procedure as the policy language, and then use this for the procedure language, maybe. That's what I don't know.
Director Clark.
Okay, so I'm going to have to go back and relive some painful history here. When I was last serving on the school board, the utter destruction of all public institutions, thanks to the financial collapse of 2008, 2009, left superintendents trying to build budgets for buildings that were simply destroying programs because there simply wasn't the money. And one of the horrible, horrible directions, of which there were no good answers, was to literally give a choice to elementary teachers or principals. Do you want to save your librarian? Do you want to save your tech specialist? Or do you want to save your elementary counselor? You get 1.5. And the answer to that is, of course, a system that can't even mildly meet the needs of the building or the students or the staff. So it does take us back to you're living in a different time period now, and you're trying to develop a policy trying to deal with some of the mess that was left behind because of those choices. You literally had people that were classroom teachers that were now volunteering to step in and be a part-time librarian because otherwise there would be no librarian. And of course, then all kinds of choices are made after that. But I'm now going to take you back to the days when I was a teacher, and it was social studies. And the question of the library was one that was critical to my classroom academic preparation. The ability to take on and I'll, forgive me if I can just throw out an example. Suppose that in the old days, we divided American history into American foreign policy and American domestic. And foreign policy basically translated World War I, World War II, and the Cold War, which was appropriate because it did take you into the conflicts most recent and choices made following that. But of course, taking on something as complex as World War II, it cannot be done out of a chapter out of a history book. And of course, you're not trying to get them to get into every unique corner. What you want is to build a base so that they can enlarge their understanding and follow-up through their own personal growth and what they perceive as their, not simply their needs, but what is relevant to whatever course of study that they are looking at in the future. And so the problem is, if you try and be a depository for everything, not only can you not do it successfully, but you injure the academic program of research. And so I'm obviously very clearly a proponent that the idea of a school library is to build a structure that supports instruction. And I don't do that lightly because it's not like I don't think we don't have to ensure that we allow development of student curiosity, because that's fundamental to who they are. But what I am saying is, we are taking public resources and we are doing that with the intent of creating a supplemental program that supports the academic program. And the ramifications of the expansion of technology are overpowering at this point. But that still feeds back into, where do you make the investments? And I'm just going to offer my own personal view. The structure of your academic program is going to be based on the individuals that you have employed on that site. They're the ones that are going to provide the leadership and the development of not only new programs, but the expansion of the resources that are brought into that building. And yes, you have a base core curriculum that is laid out and obviously approved by the state and therefore by the district. But it does become a game of limited resources. Well, anyway, I think you get my point.
So, any suggestion of the policy
Well,
language?
the question that Pam is asking is, when you start to tie in, what are you going to do with King County and, those sorts of choices, the question becomes, A, the personnel that you're dealing with and their capabilities, B, the support that the district can give to them in terms of what we're doing as a district. And then C, it still does come back to, if you ask and in fact, I can't imagine us going forward with this without asking building principals how they feel about that particular argument. Because it is about, they're the ones that are going to get stuck with having to go forward with whatever policy it is that you adopt. We have a former principal with us. I'd like to hear Superintendent Vela observation.
No, I first want to just say thank you, and also thank Pam for how she started the conversation, and also with Vice President Benno coming forth with, it's his understanding of the work of the board. And I think that's where we are, so, and then I'll get to your comment, and that is what I heard you say is historically, what libraries have been about. And I can tell you 36, 37 years in my education career, I remember as a classroom teacher using libraries in a way that enhanced my program or what I was doing in the grade level that I was teaching. And I think that aligns with what you were trying to say. Further, I also know that depending on resources, libraries were limited to what they were able to have. Therefore, partnerships were created. Hence, partnerships with, library systems in some rural areas aren't as lucky as the more dense areas where you have systems. And now, and you also mentioned digital, which now blew the top off of access. That said, I think the board still has a fundamental duty to work collaboratively to identify language in a policy. And Director Ferry, you just shared well that your understanding of policy usually is broader and a procedure is the how. Where obviously the superintendent works to implement that procedure. The policy and the work that this board is doing is really trying to take language that broadly represents your beliefs, that is going to meet the needs of those staff in the schools that you talked about, with the standards that now are being asked of teachers to be able to have students meet. And we talked about aligning resources earlier today. A library system is a part of that. How do you, in addition to what we have in core curriculum and resources that we've adopted, including supplemental resources, because we have quite a few different resources that are aligned. You also have library systems. So how are those aligned? So I'm just kind of repeating what you said and sharing with the board more of what it looks like, sounds like, and feels like in a school A, B, or C, and I'm thinking elementary, middle, high.
Right.
And the types of resources that need to be available so that I, as a classroom teacher, can meet the needs of students, and I, as a parent of a student, can also support my child, my family, with additional resources in a library, knowing that they're limited. I have to use the community and other areas of resources to do that. So, and the last thing I'll leave the board with is, I think about what I'll be sharing tomorrow with our leadership team is really how can we guarantee a viable curriculum, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, for every single student in our district. As we think of libraries, how can we guarantee that they're going to have resources, elementary, middle, high, that are adequate enough to meet the needs of what teachers are being asked to meet, students to meet standard, so that it's not a library system that's become the system that is so broad that I don't even want to go in there because I can't find what I need. I'm thinking as a teacher. We have to think about that as a community and a parent as well. So I'm just repeating what you said and added more for the board to think about.
And if I can, just asking an obvious question, one of the problems in building leadership is you don't keep the same people forever. And so whatever system that gets adopted within a building has to be, I believe, one that is understandable and easily translatable when someone else has to take that job on, because it's real easy to get all over the map.
One other thing I wanted to point out is the suggestions the board made talked about wanting a full-time certificated teacher librarian at every building. And that's writing funding into a policy.
Yep.
And I don't believe we can do that.
That is, yeah, very,
But we wouldn't want, so that my my rebuttal to that is we wouldn't want a non-certificated teacher in the classroom, right? So why would we have a librarian that doesn't have a certificated
In every school.
in every school?
Yeah, but that's-
Because,
We
once
have no-
again, you have to look at
Right.
where are the resources to ensure that's doable.
But it
That's-
should exist. We shouldn't have libraries without certified librarians. What are we gonna do instead?
You already had that in play, that's what I'm trying to say.
I guess I don't understand why we wouldn't want that.
Oh, it's not that we wouldn't want it.
course.
It's the fact that we have to build a program with, Superintendent Vela, would you explain that,
Yeah,
please?
yeah, policy, I don't think that the difference is that you wouldn't want that. I want to make sure that's clear, it really is, do you want that to govern in a policy that the staffing that you need is governed by a policy? That's what Ms. Howley is actually saying, is that a policy would then be governing staffing decisions that need to be made.
Don't we have in our policy somewhere else that we believe that we should have certificated teachers in every classroom?
Yeah,
So
we
how's
do.
that different?
That's actually certification, so I think there's two things we're saying is certified to be able to do the work of a classroom teacher, well, whatever that certification area is. And we have certification for librarians right now. You must have certification to have
Got it.
your
Yes.
certificate. So that's certification versus governing staffing within a policy.
Can we open the policy I submitted? Because I
Yes.
think I changed that part of it.
Give me just one second.
If you scroll down
Megan,
to
you
the
want to
bottom.
say something?
Yes, thank you, Wally. And if I may, it looked to me like the language was around that we believe that there should be, and it was not a shall. And I think that there is a difference between a should and a shall. Because I agree with Director Beno that is our preference, right? Our preference is to have people who are certified to teach library and tech have that certification, and that's the role that they have. Now, is that always going to be the case? Maybe not. But we,
Can you scroll down to the bottom of that?
Sure.
I think it's the last paragraph.
Okay, this
Where I
one.
say, to this end, school libraries should be staffed by trained and certified librarians and adequately and intentionally funded by the district on a consistent basis. I don't think that says every school building we must. I think that's why this was written like this, so to avoid that. So I guess, are we talking about, I thought we were talking about the policy I submitted, so if we're not, then I'm confused, I'm sorry. if
No,
that's
I
not
had
where
them
we're
both
at.
up.
Right. They're both-
We're moving around, okay.
And one of the things I, just would have issues because it says if you go to a little bit scroll up, right, it says,
More?
if you look right there, it says teacher. I mean, a committee of trained teachers, librarians in each school determine the final. That's the IMC, right?
No.
But that's what I mean, is they have the final say in the material selection. And also, that would conflict of our own IMC committee, right?
That's why we're looking at this. When I was looking at stuff, I think it had to do with I forget what thing I was looking at. It was either Library Bill of Rights or something that I feel like, and this might be a political discussion, I don't care. But the idea of librarians are professionals. They should make selections for their libraries based on their constituents that go to that school. I think, and so there should be a committee, I think part of my conversation about this is I feel like, and people can get mad at me, but I'm going to say this, we don't necessarily have a go-to person district-wide that's in charge of libraries. I know supposedly we do, But like, I feel like sometimes it feels like, well, let's just have a committee of these librarians with someone who oversees, and they are making selections and sharing resources and meet regularly like a PLC. That's what I was envisioning in that piece, like making selections for their schools. So, I mean, that's where my vision was as I looked at this. But obviously, we can edit and change. And this is just,
I just wanted to make sure that we're not overriding a committee that we voted to implement selection of material that then later on has a conflict, because we have a policy that says the final say sits with the librarian committee.
and also like the idea then, I guess this is another conversation, is we have this instructional materials committee that library is not instructional materials, so
Yeah,
possibly
there
we
you
may
go. There you
need
go.
a different PLC librarian. I think that's where
Yep.
this is headed. And I think that is an okay conversation to have. And I know that's not necessarily a decision we make, but it's, again, as we look at what other districts around us do, they have this kind of committee of librarians who do this work specifically for libraries, because it's not instructional it's not instructional materials.
And it could be in the procedure that we put that
Right.
exact
I
thing.
was just going to say, I
Right.
invite the board to think about the policy versus the procedure.
Thank you.
Because much of what you just said, Vice President Beno,
Yeah.
much of that is in procedure.
Right.
When you start to lay it out, and yes, there were conflict, there was a conflict in the last one, definitely, I do understand that. But I invite the board to think about that as you're looking at broad policy and procedure on how it gets done.
But we don't do procedure at all.
No, you
right?
don't.
No.
So that's why I'm saying, so if that's a concern, then I guess maybe we need to see a sample procedure.
I mean, honestly, if you look at the procedure of 2021,
And I have to tell you, I tried to pull it up. There's something going on with Adobe right now. It is not opening for me.
okay, but I mean, it's weird because that looks like the policy, and this looks like the procedure. So that's why I'm saying, like,
Well, parts of it.
Parts of it, yeah, 'cause I don't feel
Not
like
all of it.
not all of it, but I mean, parts of it. But we could combine it and make it so that it is something that is baseline for our policy that encompasses a broad spectrum of,
So how about if we're at 30 minutes?
okay?
How about if we table it until the next policy work session?
Right.
I'll try to merge what you've talked about, bring it back to the board for the November 30th policy work session, and hope that you have, and I see that, I'm sorry, Director Margell has her hand up.
Right.
Sorry, I missed that.
Then, yeah, you,
Thank you. I'm sorry, just had one comment, and this is fine for people to think about as we go in for our next one, is, I think about the broad use of our libraries that are used for many different things, and I just hope our policy, by it looking like it very much was about subject area and support of that for me, the libraries can be so much richer than that. I think about that they're a meeting place for clubs and activities. That's not necessarily a specific graduation requirement or classroom. And I would hate for that to not be seen as an important part of libraries. I also see libraries are an important place for, I still go back to Ridgewood's library and just how loud it is with kids just like loving learning and getting to know each other and having that. And it's such a positive, wonderful place, and listening to kids play the piano. And I would hate for that because that's not a specific subject area to be taken out. So I think that there's a few places in here that I feel like, and first I want to say thank you so much, Director Beno, for your, for what you put in here. I would say that there's a couple areas that I would just maybe want to make a little bit more broad than some of the very specific. So I hate to cut down on some of the fun parts.
If you'd like to go into your policy folder and make any suggestions, on this one.
Okay.
So that I can make the changes before we come back together and have them back out to you, so you have time to review them before November 30th. That would be great. I know it's a sensitive subject, and people
Yeah.
are all over the board on it, but, you know, we're moving to a third reading on it. It would be great to get to some consensus on what we want to do for the district.
But I think the problem lies here, Ms. Holly, and I appreciate Joe's work and I appreciate your work, is I don't know as a board that we've really examined, each one of us, where we want to be with this and really fully gutted it out, what we want our libraries going forward. Because again, you know, when I went to school, libraries were very different, and I've watched it change, but just reading all the emails over the controversy that we had, we have to get a more modernized approach to this. And if we're not going to get a more modernized approach to it, we've got to be specific of why. And I don't hear us saying that tonight. I mean, I hear what Director Clark is saying and Superintendent Vela with all their experience in this. And you've got to get buy-in from your principals, because they're the ones that could get issues with it. But there's a difference in here of control, too, from what I see it. An overall district level control, or an overall more of a broad-based control of more directed on the free reading, not your curriculum, the free reading of our actually certified librarians in the field. And if you're reading a lot of the cases that are coming forward on you know, freedom of speech, they're the new view we have to think about too. And I'm just not sure as a board that we're there, you know. With
One
this.
thing I wanted to point out before we wrap this up is in Vice President Benno's sample here, you talk about the librarians helping with the graduation, high school and beyond plans would be for our district. And I checked on that, and KEA actually has in the contract that if the teacher librarian has the homeroom or advisory, then they help with that. Otherwise, I don't believe they do, other than to direct them to students to resources.
I guess that's kind of what I meant, but I don't know how things work here necessarily when it comes to high school beyond. I know my district, so that's a good thing to know.
Are we good to table it, or would you like to move on? What would you like to do?
No, I just want to thank Director Benno for really putting this together, and this is a baseline, and then we can combine with other things and make it so that next time we come, we'll be more prepared.
And it's many hands make light work. This wasn't all me. It was just me asking people,
I really
gathering
appreciate it.
things, et cetera.
I really
Thank
And
you
it was
so much.
great to get that in my email.
Really
It was
great.
terrific, so
Yeah.
thank you.
And I'm going to personally dedicate to really study this and put this in the way I really want to see it and talk to some people too. And I apologize for not doing a better job at this before I came in here.
Okay, let's move on.
And
Oh, sorry.
I would just, for me, it would help with clarification if there are certain things people are intentionally trying to define the library as not, whether that's in policy or not. I guess that's what I'm trying to understand. It feels like there's an underlying, there's some things people are trying to make the library not. And that's what I guess I'm missing that undercurrent.
Are you speaking, Director Margell, on the definition of what we want libraries to be?
Yeah, I guess, and I think that this is just me not being part of some of the historical things with the board is, it feels like that there might be some things that we're trying to say, no, the library is this, but not this section, right? And that's what if that's the case, then that is what it is, but I'm just trying to make sure I understand that, and that's seen within the language.
Well, I think just personally, this has come up even more in what's happening locally about the book selections and what libraries are. We don't really have a long history of this, talking about it, but Director Clark?
If I can, Megan, I'm just going to give you my view on this.
Please.
So the library, and if you had a certified librarian, are part of an institutional support for the classroom. Now, the purpose of the curriculum, once we adopt it, is to ensure that students are giving multiple different approaches to try and get to command of the outcomes of that particular curriculum. That's a very delicate dance because of the fact that you have students with such a wide range of skills, backgrounds, literacy, et cetera. And so when you have a building and they're tracking the individual progress of the students, and instructors are trying to create different types of approaches, the library should be a fundamental support for that. Now, you don't have unlimited resources, and so my argument is the purpose of that library fundamentally, not by itself, because clearly it's greater than that, but fundamentally it is a support for the academic program. And that's where the primary acquisitions and so forth should come from. Now, the reality is, of course, in trying to encourage literacy just as a general topic, that means that you have to have a wide range and spectrum of materials to attract students to delve in and find what most interests them and causes them to want to read more. So it's still an academic support because literacy is a fundamental educational goal. And I'm just suggesting that it's not, what it is not is simply the local version of the public library system.
I guess I'm more confused, but that's okay, that's okay.
Just one,
Part of it.
we could talk about this all night, but where does free reading come into this then,
I was gonna say that.
Tim?
Where does,
Free reading, I mean, it's not, they're not reading everything that's on their curriculum.
oh, no. That quest for literacy does require a broad range of materials.
Well, so you put free reading in that, that's what you're saying, free reading would be part of like literacy? So to improve literacy, we'd have a variety of books for kids to read that would improve their literacy? I'm trying to understand what you're saying, I guess.
Help.
So what I hear is that is the primary consideration is that it is academic support for classes that our students participate in. And then as a secondary,
Yeah.
that free reading.
Yeah, yeah.
That's,
As
yeah.
opposed to maybe KCLS, where primary might be free reading and enjoyment of the written word. Secondarily would be maybe, support of school programming and, job, many other things, right? And so it sounds, is that what you were trying to get at?
Yes.
Okay.
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 Okay, thank you. Okay, I think that answered my question. And so so it's not that we're trying to leave anything out specifically. It sounds like we're still looking for a very broad range definition of a library, but we're trying to show that that our academic support is the primary responsibility of the library.
If I can just further clarify, the great game in leadership in a public institution is priority of resources. You don't have unlimited resources, and therefore, when you make commitments, you need to be able to have the resources to make that happen. And what I'm trying to be very clear on is support for academic programs has to be the top priority.
Just another thing to consider before we go. One of the lines in the updated policy language talked about other outside sources. So if we're talking about conserving resources at the building, students have access to King County Library, for instance. So that's just something to consider.
Oh, but I would never say, let's not have a librarian because we have KCLS.
No, no,
I
no.
would never say that.
No.
But
Not
I hear
that,
what you're saying, but in my mind, that
resources.
just clicked.
For resources.
Got it. Perfect, yes.
Yeah. Not to eliminate a position, for more resources.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we're moving on to 4220.
You said 4220?
4220,
4220, yes.
okay. This is a revision to complaints concerning staff or programs. You can see right now the language as it's been changed. I'll make it a little bit bigger here.
Ms. Holly, can you make that a little bit bigger? if possible? There we go, thank you.
Good. And let me show it to you with the track changes off so that it reads easier. Okay, everything's on the screen. Nothing goes below this, so you can see how it reads. And what this does in this policy is take out, it adds line, complaints against the board of directors, a board director, or the superintendent shall not be received under this policy. And there's some other language too. If you want to read through it as is, we can look at the changes.
Yeah, and
To just start off, I want to say that this is WASDA's, the intent of 4220 was for parents, students, so families, to bring a complaint to a principal if they had a problem at a building. Now, we have many other ways that we can direct complaints. We have policies, we have non-discrimination policy, we have HIB policy, we have contractual language, we have, sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. We have our collective bargaining agreements, we have pathways to human resources if there are complaints. So 4220 really was meant as a complaint process for parents to take to the building their starting point should be to try and resolve the complaint with the person that they have the complaint against and move from there. And that's where 4220 comes in if it has to be escalated beyond the principal.
right, but when we, as a board director, we changed that, hold on to your hats, I'm going to get real unpopular here, because we felt that the superintendent, sometimes there were issues that came up, and I think, unfortunately, people are misguiding this 4220 in some incidents on the superintendent, but we felt that we had to have some recourse, that if they'd gone through everything and they had, the superintendent was the final source on this, that if they had an issue with the superintendent, they had to be a way to file something on that. Unfortunately, it seems like a lot of people are using that in an incorrect way. I think we probably need to reword that in some way to make it very specific, but that was something that we worked on for a couple years to get across and change. And I don't want to see every avenue a board director or board of directors or superintendent should be able to, if the community has issues on it, should be able to make a formal complaint in front of the board or whoever, And I don't want that out of there, so you're going to have a problem with me.
I was looking at this and I was thinking about that too. And what you said, I wish was in here, where it's just like disagreements should be solved at the local level, et cetera, et cetera. And then also thinking about like which complaints get heard. Like, is it a policy, in our policy, that every single report has to be investigated? I guess that's a question. And then what does that process look like? Can I ask someone what that looks like and what happens with that?
So that's a procedure. So when you think of, if I understand your question correctly, is that under the current policy, there is a procedure that requires solving the problem if you can. And then there is a process you follow in terms of the employee supervisor and the employee So that's an answer to your question. I also wanted to reiterate what Ms. Holly mentioned, is that originally, before it was 4220, and I'm going to take a stab at it, but it was in the 3000s, I think. Might have been 4000s too, but it only said employee. It was designed for employees, as Ms. Howley mentioned, not designed for the broader range. It also actually combined curriculum, believe it or not. We separated that. I didn't know how that got there, but, so I wanted just to give that history to the board to think about, but under procedures where that is.
Got it. I guess I would like to see here where it says something, because it says constructive criticisms can be helpful to the district. And then at the same time, the board has confidence to protect unwarranted criticism and disruptive interference. It sounds like, just by reading this, it doesn't say, go to the building level first, then that doesn't get resolved. And I get that's in the procedure, but I would like to see a line or something that says something to the effect of, let's try to solve things where we can, and if not, this policy exists so we can do that. But I don't know what that would look like or sound like.
It's laid out pretty cleverly on the website, if people can find it, of what you're supposed to do and what your complaint is and what form you fill out.
And so that's on the district website where they can, I have a complaint about this, and it refers to this policy. So I'm wondering then if like a piece of that can go in here, and that's processed.
Referral, yeah, that would be a good idea, yeah, something like that.
It's always good to cross-reference things, because the website might change, and then that won't be captured here, but I don't know. That's just what I would like to see.
No, I appreciate that. Again, just invite the board to keep, this is a policy.
Right.
That WASDA had as their policy, and districts have reworded it in different ways. The procedures are where
Right.
they differ in that. But we have processes in place when there are concerns or complaints, right? Forget about policy for a second. And there are ways that we resolve those. This policy was put in place when potentially that may not have worked, or if it's a policy that gives parents, for employees of the district, another avenue, which still would have what you just said, Vice President Bennell, still have to keep resolving, right? What this is for. And back to what President Hamada shared earlier, that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing this policy as it written today used much more broadly, much more, I think, beyond what the intent was. And so, but I like what the board is discussing here, in that it should be resolved prior to moving to a formalized process.
Right, but the thing that concerns me is board directors and a board director can be, you can take out your complaints at when they're elected or not elected. But what we, as a board before, had a problem with is the superintendent there's no recourse. He was the final answer. And I still think, even though I don't like the way it's been applied, I still think at the very top, the board should have, if there's some particular realistic complaint against the superintendent, we should have some recourse.
I would like to have our legal counsel.
Here we
Rock
go.
Opal's chat.
I told you, buckle up. You got to fight tonight.
I am not interested in fighting. Good evening, Board President Hamada and board members and Superintendent Villa. Yeah, we put a lot of time into this because when I first got here, as a little anecdote, Israel had me check in with the Edleys. He said, you want to know how these things are running, check in with the Edleys. And almost all of them mentioned 4220 as being an incredible distraction to our operations. So, not knowing what that was, I said, that's fine. One Edley had a great comment. She said it's a culture of complaints. And so that was how we manage by complaint. So we started looking into, how these complaints are filed, what is happening to them. Are they sustained or are they dismissed? Is there anything to these? And over the last year, I've had, it's been an eye-opening experience. Most of these complaints, and we can bring the exact numbers, which may be helpful. I think Director Beno may be interested in that. Most of these complaints are employee on employee. So that's why you'll see this, the significant change in here, not just that we exempt the superintendent, but the employees will be no longer able to file a complaint against an employee. I'll give you a couple examples. Somebody comes up for their performance review. Manager gets a 4220 complaint right before he's going to get a bad review. That happens.
Wow.
And under the strict terms of the policy, we're obligated to sort of halt. If for whatever reason the manager gives a bad review or an honest review that is bad, then perhaps he's retaliating. Then we get a retaliation complaint. And this would not happen if we stuck to the true nature of what this complaint process was, which was for the public in the 4000 series. This is for the public to have an avenue to express their concerns about their kids.
Right.
As in terms of employees have a heck of a lot of rights as public agency employees. They are protected by union CBAs. They have all the other personnel policies online. They've got statutory protections. Just off the top of my head, they've got a whistleblower. They've got anti-harassment. They've got a number of protections. And we've seen in certain instances 8, 9 complaints filed. And before we could even process those 4220 complaints, a complaint or a suggested complaint under the CBA was made under the very same set of facts. So these multiple bites out of the apple really can hamstring you as a district. I mean, 1 or 2 of these employment matters can just put you sideways. This is, to me, this kind of policy would not be tolerated in most cities. I've never seen something like this. Most cities and public agencies do have the whistleblower provision, and that's sufficient to get to your level. I would also point out that you know that in your contract that if somebody comes to you and complains about the superintendent, then there's a process that requires the board to go talk to the superintendent about the complaint. That's one way, contractually anyway, that it could be handled. But anyway, from staff's perspective, these changes are necessary. As to the superintendent, I understand how the board president feels, and we've talked a little bit about this. But even that is being abused by certain people, and a major distraction, and where it needn't be. And I think there's avenues that people can make complaints in a better way. We even had this, for example, the board may recall, a 4220 complaint filed about the investigation under a different complaint process, as if it was an appeal process. So it does get abused constantly. And that's not to say we're not interested in hearing complaints, but it interferes with effective management. It interferes with traditional ways of problem resolving, conflict resolution, by empowering an employee who's disgruntled to simply file a complaint that's baseless. We have good employees, and up and down the chain, and this is not necessary for them to complain against each other.
I mean, continue. Go ahead, Megan.
Oh, no. And Paul, thank you so much for the explanation. And I appreciate you saying, and I've heard you go through that before. And I can see why we're doing that. I just want to make sure that our language that we're updating this to, because of the few, we're not ever hamstringing those who are trying to make legitimate complaints and things known that maybe we wouldn't have known about otherwise. And so that's just very much, I think, on many of our minds, is most parents are just really involved and we want the community voice. Most employees are really great and dedicated, and we want that. And how do we balance that off and not make policies in a way that it's just to deal with the fringe?
Right, I appreciate that. That's to me that's the question I would be asking as well. And you know what I can do next time we see this is I can come up with all the other avenues employees have for complaints.
Right.
That may help, and maybe some data on the complaints themselves. We can anonymize them.
Right.
And just to have a further discussion about it. And maybe to Leslie's point, or President Hamada's point, I can come up with some different language, as you suggest, that may satisfy you.
No, I have no problem with the complaints from the Kent School District staff members against, it sounds like they have a lot of avenues.
Right, right.
I would like to keep in that we can still, if people have gone through all the chains and they've talked to the superintendent and have a legitimate complaint, that they should go in front of, we don't have to hear it. We just need to bring it forward and see if what that complaint against the superintendent says. We never had any control over that before. And when you bring up contract language, I don't recall any contract language that we put in his contract about that.
It wasn't specific as to complaints.
Okay.
It was more of a general communication. It did say the word complaints in there, though.
I mean, and if there are some frivolous complaints, somehow if we could rewrite that last sentence. Board directors can be thrown off the board by elections, which, is our right as citizens, which I have no problem with, or complained against in the paper or whatever. But a superintendent, again, and I'm not saying we have a bad superintendent. Please do not think that there's something wrong here, because there isn't. But I think if we don't have any avenue on that, it takes away a problem that all our board directors fought to put in this before any of these people were on the board.
I appreciate that. I think back to Mr. Brock-Vogel's point about bringing back to the board so that you can see there are other avenues that actually are governed by federal law and governed by CBAs. And so I think it's important for the board to really understand those, because what Mr. Brock-Vogel is saying in current conditions, bypassing that or doing it in parallel is what some of the issues, that was not the intent of WASDA. Their model policy for this. And so that's, I appreciate Mr. Brock-Vogel bringing that back so that the board can continue to have the conversation about the policy they want to approve moving forward.
One last moment, if I may, take a point of privilege, if that's tolerable, under the rules.
Yeah.
We're very
Is it all?
tolerant here.
We're good. We'll see about that, Paul.
There were three changes. One, we no longer would allow employee on employee. The second would be the superintendent would be exempt. And the third one we haven't mentioned is the board itself would be exempt.
Right.
Because you may recall there were a couple times where people thought they could file a complaint against the board, and we had to tell them not to. So I think it's important to publish that to the public, saying their remedy is an election.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're not employees.
Right.
What I also like, the data that you're going to provide us, is let us know how much it costs the district by us, approximate. I don't really, you don't have to give me, but because that is ability to make a decision of what is it that we're trying to achieve. Because if it's going to cost us so much dollar amount per just chasing, people filing 4220 on 4220 that day, or 4220 on a evaluation that's coming up from their manager, that they know they're going to get a bad evaluation. Those are the things that I'm interested in, how much it costs the district. So therefore, it will make a decision for us what language we're going to put this in so that we don't allow that kind of.
Yeah, I think we can come up with some helpful data that will guide your decision. So.
We'll also
Can
include
I ask a question? I'm so sorry. When you said that we were exempting the superintendent for being able to have these complaints, just to make sure, somebody could complain about a teacher, they could complain about a principal, they could complain about an EDLI, but they couldn't complain about the superintendent? Is that what you were saying?
That's what the proposed language says, and that's the problem that President Hamada is pointing out, that she has with the language.
I can understand why she has a problem with it.
Right. I would suggest, though, if you think about it in terms of how a CEO administers an organization, the constant idea that somebody can file a 4220 complaint while they're being terminated or while they're being disciplined, and you are duty-bound as a board to be looking at that, is a bit of a distraction. And I know that to be true. And I'm understating it, is a major distraction. I don't think it advances the cause of the board, or else I wouldn't be suggesting this. I don't think it advances the cause of the board. I know Leslie and I disagree on that, but
I guess I would really have to understand how any other school employee could have a complaint from the public. And this is not employee to employee. I totally understand that.
Right.
But this is public to employee. How any other, I mean, if you can complain about the custodian, you can complain about the school bus driver, the teacher, the para, the EDLI, everybody else, but not the superintendent. That to me, that seems, I would need that explained to me in more detail.
yeah, we can take a shot at that next time and come in with some data and have a further discussion. But I appreciate that, Director Margall.
And
Thank you.
And I was only going to add that as part of Director Farah's request about an approximate cost. The cost also, we can give you approximate for the capacity for the system
Right.
to be able to follow through with those pieces is also part of that. So it's not just in dollars.
Right, in
it's
dollar, but
also-
it's the actual, the load it costs us on our system.
Yeah, thank you.
To make sure that we chase it, because once it's filed, we have to chase it. We have to make sure the validity of it is correct. So I just want to know approximate.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good discussion. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Whoops, 7:01.
7:01, we have our next policy work session on November 30th.
Well, thank you for at least a very rigorous conversation tonight.
This is good. This
Thank
is
you,
really
board
good.
members.
And it's important, it
It's
really
really
is. And
good.
thank
Thank
you,
you.
Ms. Hawley, for all your work. And
Yes,
it's
thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Howard.
7:01, we are adjourned.